Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classically Chloe Show. I'm your host, Chloe Castillo, and I'm so glad you're joining me today for another great episode. We've got two fantastic music industry people here joining us today. My friend LJ Fino, president of First Class Label Group, as well as his friend Chris Schwartz of Rough Nation Entertainment, formerly known as Rough House Records, is going to be here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris and LJ. Great to see you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Chloe.
Of course. So I'm super excited just to hear about y'all's stories in the industry where, I know, Chris, you kind of pioneered hip hop in the 80s, 90s or so. And so I'm just super curious to hear insight that you have into this industry. And LJ, I know you're kind of getting into almost counterculture music nowadays, now that we've kind of seen that take a leap forward in the past few years. The interest, and especially from the conservative movement side of things, they're really interested in the counterculture. And so I want to just talk about how we can all, I guess, kind of mesh this together and grow this all together. So just to start out with, I'm just going to ask you, Chris, if you don't mind me starting with you, what's just your background in hip hop and just a brief background on your experience in the industry and where that all came from?
Well, I'm a musician, so I started out like a lot. I joined the Navy when I was 17, and when I got out, I wasn't even old to drink yet. And I wanted to be in a band. So when I was in the Navy, I started bands, and it was what was great about it was that there were a lot of guys who were like really much better musicians than I was. I mean, I was like barely a novice, just learning how to play really. And I was getting to play in bands with all these guys who were like, who were just, who were like professional players who joined the service, and for lack of anything else to do in their spare time, agreed to join, to put a band together with me. So by the time I got out, I was like, wow, I want to be in in a band and get signed and get a record deal and all that stuff. And it didn't happen. But what did happen was I had, been doing drum programming because I was into like electronic music and stuff. And so I did drum programming for some hip hop groups in Philadelphia. And it was like a really new thing, we're talking like 1982. And so I was also, doing, production in the studio with them. And I also had my own music. I had my own group, right? And I was doing commercial dance music at the time. We went up and had a meeting at the studio with a distributor who pressed up all the hip hop records that came out of New York. His name was Vince DeRosa. And he listened to my music, my group, and he said, this stuff really sucks. And then he said, but the hip hop stuff, we like that, and they started paying me to produce records and to bring in groups and everything, and that's kind of like where it started. So and then I started managing people. I was promoting shows and just kind of and then by I think it was 1987 we did a distribution deal with was at the time CBS Records, which became Sony Music.
So when was Rough House Records started?
1986, actually.
Okay.
1986.
Okay, wow. So this is very interesting. So it's been going on for a very long time. This is something that you were right in the beginning of, it sounds like. And so I'm gonna pull LJ in here a little bit. So LJ, I think you told me that you guys came from the same small town, right? Hometown in Philadelphia, if that's correct?
Yeah,
that's correct. I
know LJ was a till very recently. I didn't know he was from this area. I was wondering how he knew it so well. It's like I thought it was his work on the campaign, and I was like,
we're talking about Little Road. It's a very small town outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Montgomery County. And when he sent me the contract, when we first started, entertaining a co-venture of some sorts, which we can get into the details of that if you'd like, it said my hometown on it. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, there was a record label based out of my hometown. I never knew about it. And it's just that Chris has his company, I think, incorporated at this one property that he owns there. But the label really is in Philadelphia. But the contract had my small little town with the same zip code. I couldn't believe it. I remember telling him. So we've been talking for months now, and I've really fostered a great relationship. And I think our vision for America First music and counterculture music is very completely aligned, which we can, of course, get into more as we have more questions.
Sure. So tell me about what you guys are planning to do together with your record labels.
Uh,
Um,
is that for me or
Go
for
ahead,
Chris?
Jose. That's for you, Jose.
Either
Go
of
ahead.
you.
I think we have a lot planned in store. I'm helping Chris out on the, I guess you could call it more secular side of Rough Nation as well. But when it comes to First Class and Rough Nation's co-venture of some sorts that we've come up with, we really see this void in the marketplace, in the music marketplace, for counterculture and America First music that resonates with what people would call individuals who live in the flyover states. Um, and not only that, I mean, there's plenty of conservatives that listen to music, and I could pull up Spotify for artists right now, and some of our top markets are LA, New York, Chicago, places you wouldn't expect, but they're densely populated, so there's enough
And
conservatives
I,
there.
I think Yeah, I think it's the DIY paradigm too, that's happening. That it's like because prior to that, prior to this whole phenomena of like artists are doing everything on their own because a lot of artists don't really
Right.
deal with labels anymore. They put out their music digitally and they tour and they sell merchandise and everything like that. And I think with that, you're going to see a lot more successful artists, independent artists, and of that you're going to finally see like the artists who are kind of like who follow the movement coming through, who've always been there, right? But it was never a level playing field, and it's finally become a level playing field. And the major distribution powers, they really don't dictate anymore. There is no MTV. They don't own MTV. They didn't. Radio wasn't. It was like in the in the 80s, right? In the hip hop, it was the purview of the independent labels. There were all independent production companies that owned hip hop. It was based like groups like Tommy Boy, Next Plateau, Sleeping Bag, Fresh Records. Cold Chillin'. These are all these independent labels that basically they were the core of the hip hop industry. And what happened was that the majors gave them a pretty wide berth because there was a whole scandal in the late 70s going into the early 80s with disco. And there's companies like Casablanca and Neil Bogart and everything who basically all these independent labels and the majors were in on it too. They were basically what they call juking the stats. They were kind of like not being truthful with their sales, right? And what they were doing was that they were purporting records and saying this record charted, it's a platinum record, when the reality is the record sold like 200,000 copies, right? And they had this way of keeping the records out in the marketplace among in distribution and everything. And when the whole backlash happened, it was a DJ out of Chicago who started this whole thing about disco sucks, right? And so suddenly everybody stopped buying disco records, and these records
Hmm.
came back in droves to all the labels, and their warehouses were overloaded with all these records, and suddenly disco was completely out of fashion, right? And so a lot of guys got fired in the recording industry. A lot of things happened. And so when hip hop, it was like the sort of like everybody thought it was like it was a place card. It was kind of like this temporary place card, is a kind of like you had the functionality of disco, you had the cynicism of punk, and then you had hip hop, and everybody thought, well, this is this kind of like odd little quirky thing. And because it was a 12-inch oriented thing, the labels didn't want to get involved in anything having a 12-inch music, anything that was released on 12-inch, singles, right? So they gave it a wide berth for like 10 years, which is a pretty amazing thing because, hip hop had like an unfettered 10 years of like to come of age. But by the late 80s, early 90s, what happened was, the major labels saw that there was suddenly all these very successful acts happening, and they weren't spending a lot of money on these records. It was very inexpensive lifestyle marketing applications, and they kind of like colonized the hip hop business. They started like, signing all these artists and everything. And then you had the advent of MTV because MTV had been happening throughout the 80s, right? But by the 90s, it was pretty much unspoken that if you weren't on MTV, you couldn't get on radio. MTV basically, there was a point where there was like 30,000 terrestrial radio stations in the United States where you could get records played. Once MTV came along, that was over, right? So now we're going into the 90s, and two things happened. You had the popularity of the CD, and you had the proliferation of hip hop music becoming like a global phenomenon. So what happened was you had young black entrepreneurs, like, artists and everything, who were suddenly like, who were high net worth individuals, right? And you've never seen this in music ever. There was no time in the history of music where you had people who had the wealth of what hip hop. Hip hop has become a global economy. If you look at
Right.
hip hop from a very general view of the hip hop audience and the people who are into hip hop music and everything, the market, are you ready for this? $500 billion a year. Doesn't that sound insane?
Wow.
It's insane. $500 billion
Yeah.
a year is the global hip hop market,
What
right?
is insane? I'd actually like to add. I think I consider hip hop pop these days, and I think that's what it's
Right.
it's sort of
Right.
become in many ways. You can listen to an Ariana Grande song or a Katy Perry song, and you hear a lot of elements of hip hop music within pop tracks.
You can watch
Um,
people doing line dances now in hip hop music, it's crazy. It's
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And somebody's always making a trap remix to something. But back to the counterculture music, I think what I've learned, and I think what Chris also acknowledges, is that it's not necessarily the genre of music that captivates the music consumer. Sure, there are some music lovers who really love to enjoy hearing a particular sound or particular instruments. But what I've learned, and I think people like even yourself, Chloe, or Lowe's Alexander, Forgiato Blow, or Jimmy Levy, or Topher the Marine rapper, or Jason Aldean, or Oliver Anthony, that this music is not exclusive to any genre. It's the lyrical content that people relate to. And Chris, you can check me on this if I'm wrong. I wasn't born yet when you started your record label and had tremendous success, but it reminds me very much so. I mean, you can look at rap that was being ignored by major music executives until people like Chris Schwartz and others jumped in and took it seriously. I think we're seeing sort of a similar thing here with this counterculture type music. There's this huge void in the marketplace, yet there are no like real music moguls who want to touch it because they're scared of the music. And here's a good analogy. I like to. Everybody always calls Donald Trump the people's billionaire or the people's president. I think Chris is the people's music executive. He really does see that, and I think that's something we're certainly going to tap into, regardless of genre, whether it's R&B, whether it's rap, folk, classical, country. I don't think we're going to pigeonhole ourselves into any particular genre. But I think counterculture music as a whole, I just routed off a bunch of artists who do all different genres of music. It's really based off of the lyrical content.
right. and,
Because
and
I
also,
couldn't tell you how many there's a Let's Go Brandon plaque behind me this way, and I couldn't tell you how many videos I've seen of 70-year-old white women who you would expect would never listen to rap music dancing to
Right.
Let's Go Brandon. It's because they can relate to the content that's being rapped about. Where you've seen, if you look at rap, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong on this. There's been sort of an evolution of rap lyrics and the hip hop lyrics, where it started with street talk and people relating to their lives growing up in the streets.
it's about being
Then
able to tell stories of metaphors and having
telling
a
a
street
story.
vernacular. It's who's has
Exactly.
the
I
latest
know.
vernacular. And the vernacular,
Right.
for the most part, now I'm ashamed. I'm almost like it's a shame that this is where it comes from. But it comes from the jails, right? Because the jails is where they come up with all the latest, like the whatever slang is like applicable to something. And so it's can you tell a story within that?
Right.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and I was just saying, I think, and that story can be told in an America First counterculture type of way,
Right.
regardless of genre of music. I think, like I said, it was, it started with people telling a story about how they, were raised and how things came up. Then it sort of turned into, hey, I've got a record deal, I party, I hang out with celebrities, I'm very wealthy. Now you're hearing musical lyrics reflect the pursuit of generational wealth.
Yes.
And
Right.
really is only one politician out there that really emulates that message, and that's
Absolutely.
President-elect Donald Trump.
Right.
Um,
So
Look
I
at
like I
50
said,
Cent. Look at 50 Cent. Look what his whole thing's about. He writes
right,
about it. He's all about I he talked about his son the other day and how his son is on an allowance of like $10,000 a month, and he's trying to get his son to understand that, that like this isn't how the world works. You need to go out. I earn this money. You need to go out and earn money and everything, right? And I don't know. I don't think this probably might be so court ordered or something. Like it's probably like alimony or something like that. But I was thinking to myself, why do you keep giving him $10,000 a month? But my point being is that 50 Cent is like he is like one of those, and obviously Jay Z, Nas, all these people where they all came from very, very, very humble beginnings, and now it's like they hip hop is the first musical genre in the world that's produced billionaires, right? Now, of course, you have Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson are billionaires, but I mean that, more billionaires per capita, per genre than any other genre of music. And I think that it's like the idea of capitalism and the idea of having those opportunities and everything has resonated with the hip hop audience, and it all falls in line with the movement. And the other thing too is that I think that I think that there's no there's we're going to see more and more things happening where a lot of these artists that are into this are going to have more and more kind of like venues. When I say venues, I don't mean specifically a place where they play live, but I say venues like radio, marketing, retail. I think things are gonna open up because it's. I think if anything, the election has told us that there's more of us than anybody ever realized before. And it's all very it's inspiring because I think it's going to blow up in a really big way. It'll probably be its
so I
own
want
chart billboard.
Yeah, so I want to interject here real quick. So a couple things were said that I really think are interesting. So first of all, like you just said, Chris, there are more of us than there are of them, and I think this is kind of the first time that we as Americans or conservative Americans or whatever you want to call us have been, or common sense Americans, not insane Americans. I can keep going on the list here, but I think this is one of the first times in quite some time that we've actually been reassured that we are not the minority. We had this saying, "Oh, we're the silent majority," and we kind of just say it to ourselves hoping it's true. And I think that this election really proved that actually it is true, and that we need to stop being silent, silent no more over here, because we're not having the impact that we could be having on our nation, and like LJ was saying, on the next generations to come. So I want to now move over to what you just said, LJ, because I like what you said, that hip hop it was a matter of it was kind of like the underdog success, if that makes sense. Maybe I'm wording this incorrectly, but to me it was like people who didn't come from the wealthiest families in the world. They weren't already successful. They came from the streets and they built themselves up through their art, through their craft, and became, like you said, partying with the celebrities. They had the fancy cars and all the cash and whatever, the extravagant parties and whatnot, whatever seemed to, I guess, represent wealth and success in that time. And I think that now at this point, especially with what we've seen with Hollywood get so corrupt and so disgusting, honestly, over these years, I kind of feel like Americans, I don't think we'll ever totally turn away from um, that kind of wealth being what we look to as success. But in a way, I kind of think that we are, because I think we're seeing wealth also, like you said, generational wealth. With, you don't want just the party for yourself, you want a country where you can raise
No,
your
you want
your
it for your
family and the
kids
next
and your
generation.
grandkids. And that's what
absolutely.
that's
Exactly,
what
and
that's a message that that blacks and Latinos had sent out in this election. They said that
Right.
Democrats, we don't want your pity. We don't want your pity. We want to be able to do things for ourselves and to have like our own thing, right? And to be able to go out
Mhm.
and get generational wealth. We don't, and it's like, and the one thing that that I heard somebody talking about the other night was that the Democrats, they didn't understand that the voters, like the common people, don't live somewhere else. They're right in front of them. You see them every
Right.
day. You go to the Starbucks, you go to like work, you go to like the gym, they're there. They just didn't recognize,
Mhm.
wow, there are black people there, and they all seem to be doing okay. They're all like, nobody is like, um it's like, you know, yeah, it's like they just they don't get it. It's like they're like, they think, oh, look, these poor people. There's like, no, nobody wants that. No, they just want the opportunity, and they want to be able to pay their mortgages, and they want, they don't want other things. They just want to be able to exist like normal people, and
Sure.
I think that message was lost, in a big
Right,
way for this.
and I think that that's probably one reason why Donald Trump was so popular with the Black and Latino votes this time around, because they experienced the, I guess, pity from the left in this past administration. It didn't serve any of us well, no matter what status you came from. None of us did well during this last administration, and so I think it was kind of a wake up call to those groups saying, okay, that the pity and the handouts clearly didn't work, and so let's actually, we just want a real opportunity to be successful Americans like everybody else. There's nothing separating us except for this idea that the left has kind of instilled in those cultures, that you're being oppressed and et cetera, et cetera. Bringing it back to the music here, I think that like what LJ is saying about counterculture music is very true, because it's not just a matter of, oh, counterculture music is one genre, it's this genre, that genre, and we as conservatives, or as whatever you want to call us again, like that one genre. I think it's more a matter of the messaging in that music is something that we relate to. And with that said, it's not just relating to something like, I guess, back in maybe the 80s and 90s, it might have been a little bit more a matter of, okay, the underdog was becoming successful for the first time, and it was a kind of a big deal, and it was a hip thing to talk about in songs and whatnot. Now I feel like the average everyday American has kind of been the underdog, and I guess in our government's eyes, and the way that we've been living. And so it's kind of like now is our turn to, through our music, kind of tell the story of, we're Americans, we have these kind of values, we love freedom, we love this, we love God, we love our country, and we want to talk about that in our music without being suppressed by the labels who are going to say, oh, you can't talk about that because it's not a part of our agenda. So I think it's really, really cool, Chris, that you are so open to, as someone has this big label. I think LJ was telling me that Forbes valued your company at $175 million in the 90s. I mean, clearly you've been massively successful here. So I think that it's very encouraging to hear someone like you, who has already had this kind of success, instead of just sticking to that one path, kind of opening your eyes to the other opportunities that could be there to really build up this counterculture in our country and in our movement as conservatives, as we build this nation, I guess, back up again through these next 4 years. That makes sense. So this is super encouraging for me to hear.
No, it is, and I have to tell you, it's I wouldn't even have thought, like, say 5-6 years ago, that there was a connection in, between like political sentiment, like what, like the way people felt and what people wanted to do and everything. It never occurred to me that that there was a whole thing. It's not like the way you have gospel music attached to the church. You know what I mean? It's different in that it's more lifestyle. I see a lot of, like, there's a couple, like country artists that we're looking at. When I say country, I mean, not traditional country, but like, more like a hard edge, like kind of like a Chris Stapleton type of thing. And you know, I can I can see a time that's going to come when there's going to be like festivals and everything that's going to be
Right.
centered around this particular ideal and this genre of music, or these subgenres of music. And I, for one, I'm very excited for that day to come, and I think it's going to happen sooner or later. I think, as a matter of fact, I think
there's actually
LJ and
one
I,
already
right? I was going to say, go ahead.
Rock is a part of. I forgot. I think it's, what was it? Chloe, you may be familiar with it. What is their tour called? The Kid Rock was
Which one?
doing.
Oh, I don't remember the name of the tour, but I know what you're talking about. And Kid Rock
Yeah.
did do a tour where he brought in, I think, Jason Aldean, some other musicians I'm not totally familiar with, but we were actually doing a pro-America concert. I'm going to stop us real quick. We're going to go to a commercial break. We'll be right back with some more from Chris and LJ.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0. When I invented My Pillow, it had everything you'd ever want in a pillow. Well, now there's new technology that makes it even better. My Pillow 2.0 has my patented fill combined with a cooling fabric with temperature regulating thread. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
Now's the time to go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use the promo code to save 50% on your MyPillow 2.0. Not only that, for a limited time, your entire order ships absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
mypillow.com.
All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. So we're going to have to cut this into two segments because we have so much to talk about here. So this episode is coming to an end here. We're going to, please do tune in, though, to this next half of the episode where Chris, LJ, and I are going to talk about how we can start shifting, I guess, the needle here in the music industry, how we can get into combining hip hop and pop and counterculture music, how we're going to build that up over these next years, what they have in mind, and also why has the conservative movement been missing out on the opportunity to incorporate music into the movement. So more about that from Chris and LJ on the next episode. Stay tuned. Please do not miss this next one. You're going to want to hear it too. Chris and LJ, thank you so much for joining us. See you back in just a minute.